Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's series of our Holistic Toolbelt Chats. My name is Cara Okinen of Soul Healing, and I'm a relationship breakdown and divorce coach with over a decade experience in family law. I'm really passionate about helping individuals to navigate through the process of relationship breakdown, separation, and divorce, and the family court system in a way that's really conscious and mindful, in a way that sees them thrive and really mitigate the negative toll of the separation upon themselves and their family, mitigating the financial loss, financial expense, legal expense. We're talking about conflict here, emotional turmoil, stress, and especially the negative impact on children as they're navigating through that process. And with that, I'm also very passionate about bringing a holistic lens as they're navigating through the process to support my clients and those moving through relationship breakdowns with all the tools, resources, and knowledge that they need to make really wise, holistic, conscious decisions about the future of their family dynamics and both financial and in parenting in a way that's going to see them really thrive based on what their own authentic needs are and drowning out the noise of everyone else. So today I'm so excited to be having a chat with Jackie Gravesend of Loan Market. Jackie is a loan broker and she loves all things finance. She has a background in small business, so she really knows the struggles of owning your own business. And she's also super passionate about helping people navigate and find solutions to financial pickles that other people may not be able to find without judgment. She loves helping people to refinance, debt consolidate and purchase new assets as they're navigating through relationship breakdowns as well and through the process of separating financially from a former spouse. So this is what we're going to be speaking in today, and I'm so excited to have Jackie here with us. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Jackie. So tell me, Jackie, tell me a little bit about yourself and what brought you into lending.
So I've been quite a few years as self-employed, always come from a family background of everyone, family always running their own businesses. So what brought me into this was during COVID or just before COVID, we had sold our business and I guess got invited into this industry by a friend. And it was quite an eye-opener because coming from a small business background, you know, you often looked at lenders and were either knocked back for a loan or something like that. And you always thought, gosh, is it us? But since coming into it, I guess my biggest eye-opener is that every lender has different policies and things. So, you know, I came into the finance industry from there.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So COVID brought you here, and what was your background before COVID? What were you doing before then?
It was like a sort of an Airbnb that I'd run for years. Yeah, so I've always come from hospitality background, so always loved being with people, talking to people, and it's always been my thing, I guess. So yeah, always been hospitality.
Yes. So tell me now, in terms of, you said you obviously realise now that banks have all different policies when you're navigating through obtaining finance and consolidation and the like. So what can you tell me a bit about that and what challenges people can face as a result of differing policies?
It's been an interesting journey and probably something that I actually am quite passionate about. So, you know, you might go to a bank, for example, let's say everyone knows Commonwealth Bank, ANZ, National Bank, all the big fours as we know them as. And so you've been with them, you believe banks have loyalty and things like that. Then you go, you know, they may up rates without you realising, just from no one plays fair to being loyal. Different policies, like if you are in a particular profession that, you know, other lenders might be more favourable to you. Lenders look at there's a lot of different factors that they look into as far as your living expenses and what's included and what's not included. There's different policies about your credit scores. So a lot of things that people don't factor into is your actual credit score.
Okay.
So it's probably one of the greatest things that I love educating, bless you, I love educating people about. You know, where people might get knocked back for something and they think, oh, I can't go anywhere else. But in actual fact, you probably can go somewhere else. Another interesting fact with lenders is, you know, the longer that you stay with a lender, let's say related to a home loan, for example, the longer that you potentially stay with the lender and you don't review that, you could be paying way more to that lender than what you even look at, because how often do people look at their bank statements or their actual documents and look at their interest rates and things like that? So it's something that I, you know, I am actually quite passionate about. I even this week, a gentleman that's been with a particular bank, and I said, have a look at it and actually tell me what your rate is. And he's paying 8.3.
Wow.
In today's industry. And he was like, I didn't realize I was paying that, because it becomes the norm, right? That you just too busy, you just pay these. We all complain about how everything's going up, but there are some simple things in life that you can actually change to make your life a little bit less stressful, or put the money back into your pocket.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, can you tell me a little bit as well about how you work with people who might be navigating through the process of separation, like in terms of, how you might be able to help people with what information that they may need and making decisions around maybe the family home? Tell me a little bit about your experience with that.
It's a good question with that. I've done a few of them, and you have the cases where it's the initial and there's the fight over who gets the home or who doesn't get the home. And, obviously, generally someone, when they've got married, they buy a home together, so they're both on the title. So part of a separation can be, or negotiations is that, so for example, partner A wants to keep the house, partner B says, well, you can, but you've got to buy me out. Problem that is faced often with it is to buy you out. It's not a matter of just going back to the lender and saying, take my partner, my husband, wife, whatever, off the title. It's actually about then you having to reservice for that loan. So I think that sometimes some people get very, your security blanket's been taken away from you, right? You've worked for this home, but there's dual incomes paying for this home. And I think that's one of the biggest things that people get very scared about, and about navigating that. And there are cases where you actually can't service in order to keep that home. So sadly, it's a factor of selling it. Another thing that comes, that people don't really think at is joint debt that comes in as well. And when I talk joint debts, I talk things like credit cards, car loans, personal loans that could be out there. Is it pays afterpays? There's all those things that are potentially part of the joint. So when you separate, all that's got to be factored into it. So you go from looking at serviceability of a home loan from two people with dependents, with XYZ in liabilities, to then being a sole person. So it's one income coming in. If those loans are in, any of those joint liabilities, if they're in your name, then you have to look at, a lender will look at going, you need to service all of that. So sometimes it's actually starting the journey of going, okay, if you want to keep this home, let's start from the bottom. Let's look at what facilities, what other, liabilities that you have out there. And we work up and sort of try and navigate that. Is this feasible? So, you've got to look at the feasibility of it before you sort of, and sometimes sadly it is going, it's actually more beneficial, which is a very tough call because there's a lot of emotion in it of actually having to sell that home, divvy it all up, and you actually may service better in getting a new loan based on that payout, and then having a better chance of getting something different at a lesser price.
Yes, no, I hear what you're saying. And it's interesting what you're saying there as well about, the serviceability aspect. I think a lot of people don't understand that when you're talking about serviceability, it's, you're talking about the entirety of the debt, of the credit card, even if it's not being used.
Yes.
If you've got a 10 grand limit, you're being assessed on that 10 grand, not on even if it's got nothing on it. Is my understanding. But also people don't tend to realize that when they're talking about refinancing the house after a breakup, that they're typically not just refinancing the debt that's already there. They typically need to refinance more than that to pay out the other person, a significant sum more than that for whatever the interest is, or whatever way they're structuring things to navigating the process. A lot of people don't appreciate that they need to look at, okay, well, what's the cost going to be for me at this higher rate, not at this current rate, but at this higher amount that I'm going to need, and can I get that amount, and is that something that's going to be viable for me? Exactly.
And that's the hard fast rule of what actually happens out there. And people look at it going, okay, so if I've got a loan of, let's say, 500,000, keep it very, very simple, but it's not just that refinancing of that 500,000. Like, there's obviously a payout, and generally you look at, and then you go to the other side of, okay, well, what is that payout figure? Which obviously that's where it comes into the legality side, but it's not the payout figure of that 500,000. It'll be the payout figure of what the value of that house and land is. So, for example, if you're sitting on $1 million property, yes, you've got 50% equity in there, but that partner's going to want that excluding the debt. So you've actually got to look at the overall, value of the property, divide that, and your debt may be well and truly over what the actual equity is in that property. So therefore, you just sadly, there are cases where you may not even service for that.
Yeah.
And paying out the end debt. So, there's cases, and it's important to, I guess, understand. I actually had a case very recently that, and these are the cases I kind of do find a lot of satisfaction in, that where a couple had actually separated. He'd had a previous relationship. They had bought a house together. It was actually an amicable agreement, but a financial agreement was set up. And the terms, they did have a $15,000 credit card jointly between them. They did have a home loan that was jointly between them. And at the time, part of the financial agreement was that he was to pay out a figure to her to retain the house, and he had to do it in 30 days. However, at the time he wasn't working. He was very lucky that his ex-partner was probably quite considerate. So he wasn't working. He wasn't in a position to be able to refinance because nobody would look at him. Come forward, met somebody else, been together 7 years, got married, still with that same agreement, he believing, and the ex-partner's still on that. So in a new relationship of 7 years, another new 2 children involved in it. So we now got 5 children. And they were introduced to me and they were like, what can we do? Because obviously the new wife had no security over this. And it was interesting because we had to then sit and look at all the liabilities. And it wasn't okay, great, we can do this. It was looking at going, okay, you have loads of equity in the house. You've done a positive. You've never defaulted on your home loan. But they had numerous facilities open. And we had to slowly close all those facilities down in order to be able to get him to service. But more importantly, when we pulled up a credit file, this credit card that had been jointly done over 7 years ago, he had ignored it, and so it had gone off to a credit company, and so he had a massive default on his credit file. So his credit file sat at 400. So lenders look at that, and a 400 credit score, pretty much hardly any lender will look at you, irrespective that he had all this equity in his home. So we had to do steps, and I always relate to it and said to them, it's like climbing a ladder. We've got to do all these steps before we can get to the top. And I'm happy to go on that journey with you, but we have to do step by step in order to do it. And so we were able to, do things like, he lived in fear of this, that he knew, knowing that he would have had a default on his credit file. And there's facilities and companies out there that can help you. So, we took that, was our first step of going to a credit repair company. She was able to clear that. His score within 3 months went from 400 to over 800. So it put him in that amazing marketplace for it. He had overdrawn some cards. So part of it was then we looked at, okay, if we clear all these debts into the home loan and we do it redo your home loan over 30 years, we weren't pulling out extra funds for them to go and have a nice time, but we were able to consolidate then these debts, put it into that home loan and refinance, get the ex-wife off, put the new wife on. But it was a 5-month period of a lot of work of each. Every week we literally checked in and had to do all these steps. But it's probably one of the most rewarding things to be able to help people where they thought that they could never, ever do it. So he was literally an ostrich for over 7 years, thinking he could never get out of this situation. Wow. And it's simply by picking up that phone, having a conversation and wanting to be proactive about doing it. So, And
I think it's really important what you speak into there as well, Jackie, around, sometimes it is a process. I think a lot of people when they're moving through a relationship breakdown, and they think it's do these things really quickly. And I mean, aside from all the legality side of things and having to come to an agreement between you and all that kind of thing, it's also really important to be proactive in speaking with a broker so you can get clear, okay, well, is this possible? And if it is possible, how long is it going to take me? Because we need to be really mindful of these things. Like you say, like you don't want to be, I mean, that client of yours got very lucky because he wasn't defaulted of an agreement. The consequences could have been a lot worse for him. In my having practiced as family lawyer in the past, could have been a lot worse for him. But fortunately, it seems like he did have a very conscious and considerate former partner. And this is the value of, as well as taking these approaches consciously and considerately, navigating the process. But it's important for people to pick up the phone and have these conversations with you very, very early in the piece, is what I would think, and I'm sure you might agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And even moving forward, if there's situations like this that, because there's obviously a lot more emotion involved in it too, particularly when you're talking a family home. And sometimes it may be a case of going, you actually can't afford this now. However, if like, for example, if you've been a housewife, worked part-time, and it's like, okay, you couldn't actually refinance now. Or like him, that you went back in there, you could have gone, well, okay, if you got a job, if you looked at an income of X, Y, Z, so these are your goals, then yes, you could potentially refinance further down the track. So sometimes it's about having those conversations saying, okay, I might not be able to afford it now, but if your main goal is to have that home, what's that end debt going to look like? What income and what do I look like servicing that? And it could be a negotiation going back to the lawyers and going, I can do this, but I need a year or two, so there's sometimes things that having those of looking outside the square that you might want to sever those ties, but maybe not all ties are going to be severed there and then. And, you might not necessarily lose everything. Yeah, look, I do a lot, even this week did one where, and it's not necessarily even home loans, is it? It's like people separate, they need to go and get, a rental property, and then they, it's all that, that new thing, and you borrow from here and you borrow from there because, there's you get yourself into a lot of things where you borrow and you might have all these facilities. And, even this week had a gentleman separated, sold one house, he's bought the house, but in order to get back on his feet, he had things happen. So he had to get a new car. So he had to take out a car loan, and there was a lawnmower. So he took out, and then he, to put food on the table, he got, a credit card. So we had all these sort of debts. 2 years down the path, he's like, and he was on very, very good money. And he's like, I literally am living week to week and I shouldn't be. And again, it was sitting down, let's look at what you've got. And sometimes is about, okay, let's look at all these debts. And people really struggle. Like if you have 6 or 7 different facilities out there, and I'm talking things like Afterpay and ZipPay where, it's that catch of, buy now, pay later, and you're stuck. Like a dog gets sick or an animal gets sick, you get a vet bill that you can't afford. You can take these facilities out and they add up. And before you know it, you could be up to 6 or 7 different credit facilities out there. And sometimes it's looking at those and going, and you are chasing your tail because you've got 6 or 7 different payments coming out over the month. And you're trying to deal with that whole new single life and that whole getting back on and if kids are involved in kids and schooling and everything else, and it's a massive struggle. And I throw a lot of empathy into that and a lot of time to go, just sit down and talk to me. Sometimes we might not be able to help now, but we could even look at going, okay, let's consolidate for the short term. And I'm not a loan shark to go, let's consolidate and get rid of it. But sometimes, consolidating all those debts, and you might be paying some things, you've got credit cards defaulting every month. So you're into the, 25, 26% interest rates or whatever it might be. But you might consolidate everything. You might be paying a higher rate and get a personal loan. But what it does is it alleviates it. You go, all right, on the 6th of every month, I have this one repayment coming out, and I can pretty much assure that repayment will be less than all those multiple ones. And you've got one repayment. It allows you to budget. It allows you to start moving forward and going, okay, I only have to pay this down now. And if it gives you, recently a couple, it was $200 a month back into their pocket, but it meant that $200 gave them breathing space to move forward.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, makes a huge difference.
Yep. And I always say it's like, it's climbing ladders, or it's like instead of spending your life treading water and feeling like there is no out. And people will often go back to their bank and the banks, they can't help you. And it's probably true that it doesn't fit the policy of that bank. And that's why a broker is, I would say, way more beneficial and will work to find a solution for you, because it's in their interest. They get paid by the lenders. So it's not costing you them, but it's just the time, a broker's time to help try and sit down and help navigate you through these things. So,
yeah. Wonderful. And tell me a little bit about how you then work, Jackie. Are you all sort of virtual? Do you have an office? How can people contact you? If they just want to get clear on, what their capacity is.
Pick the phone up.
Pick the phone up. Give you a call.
It's easy, like just pick up the phone. And we pretty much are mobile, so we can come to you. I do mainly work from, like, I work out of a serviced office now, so I can actually help a lot of people. People are busy too, that's the thing, right? And I often say to people, I am busier more working at nights than on weekends than what I am in the mornings, or I'm happy to work around someone, because let's face it, if I could meet everyone during the day, probably tells me that you don't work, so therefore I probably can't help you. So you've got to take that consideration in that nowadays we've got hookups through Zooms. An initial phone conversation is all you need to sort of splurt out what you're doing, gives us an idea of, okay, where can we go, and then let's meet, let's run through scenarios so you can see it. And I'm probably a bit of an over talker, a bit of an overshare, because I like to try and help people. So, and I'm a visual person. Some people don't. They just get me out of this, but sometimes it's just sitting down and working out a plan, seeing how you can get through and navigate through these things. It's not a quick fix. I always say to people, if sometimes these things are not a quick fix, and sometimes they're a very simple fix.
Yeah. I think it's really important comment you just said before, as well as, like you said, if you're seeing them during the day, they're probably not working. That means you're probably not going to be able to help them. I think it's an important point to make as well. When, in my experience, some people, when they're navigating through a relationship breakdown process, the stay-at-home parent thinks that they can just get finance based on the equity, and that's really not how it's working. You need to have income sufficient to service a loan. That's correct, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. That's exactly right. So you'll find often, even taking out of this, where people start trying to build that investment portfolio, obviously you often hear things of, I bought so many properties without spending a cent. You're still tying up properties, and it's all about the serviceability of a loan. And the serviceability of a loan looks at what your income is, what liabilities that there are out there, and also what you're trying to finance. So, and yes, equity can certainly help you. Don't get me wrong, like the equity in the house, one, it helps you to allow you to potentially refinance. And there is that, I always stipulate to people, there is that potential of that false security. Like if you've got, several loan facilities that open, of whatever they might be it zip pay, afterpays, credit cards, but be mindful that the whole objective is to, sometimes is to incorporate that into the home loan and spreading that out over the 30 years, whereas most of these facilities might be only a 5-year term. But just bear in mind also is it's about looking at what your cash flow is. So we might be able to go, if we spread this over 30 years, we can help relieve you, have some cash flow to allow you to start building up some financial equity as well, because some people can be very much an asset rich but cash poor, which comes down to where people look at that equity in the house, but how are they servicing that? And the bank, no one's going to lend money without being able to see that they can get it back, and nobody wants to lend you money for you then to turn around and say, well, you just lent me money and I can't afford to pay that loan. So, and banks are, ever since the Royal Commission, banks are very, very conscious of that. So there's there are hoops that you do have to jump, and rightly so. They can't just be lending out just because you've got equity. They don't want to be taking, it's not that simple for a bank to just come in and go, oh, there's so much equity, we can lend you, we don't care if you pay, we'll come and take that home. Not that, then you'll be back in court over something else. So it's
they don't want to have to take you home. That costs them time and money.
Exactly. And they don't want to do that. That's not why banks are out there.
No, it's not. So any other thing you just mentioned there as well, I think, about serviceability is that looking at that, they're not just looking at it at the level of you just being able to pay that loan now. They're actually looking at it, if there's interest rates increases, if property prices drop. They take into account all of those factors as well, don't they, when making those assessments and calculations? So it's not as straightforward as people think.
No, and there's buffers on loans. So if you look at home loans, you see a rate out there going, oh, I can see 6.09. So the best education of someone is, so a bank will do, you'll see a 609, but a bank will service you, they'll add a 3% buffer. You'll often hear some will do a little bit less, but as a general, banks have a 3% buffer. So they're actually servicing you at 909. So they're saying, okay, if a rate rises, we know that you can account for that. So at the time of a loan that I go, okay, well, this is what your loan is. So your repayments at 609 is rounded off $2,000, but they're actually buffering you at 9. So really your repayment, they know that you can make up to, let's say, $2,500 in it. And the correct thing is to go, you know what, if you could put this extra $500 away each week, then you potentially, if there are any rate rises, you've got that buffer there. Or if there is something that happens, you always have that buffer there. Or you've learned to make those repayments at that higher rate, so you don't have that, you don't have that shock of when a rate gets increased because you're paying that higher amount. So, sometimes you can, interesting one I had the other day where it was a couple and they had been paying the higher amount. So when they were on a fixed rate, so they were actually paying on what the variable rate was. So they were on back in the day, just, over the COVID period where they were on a 1.98, but they were actually paying the rate of a variable. So they were paying back 3 years ago, they were buffering and paying an extra $300 to their loan. Once it came out of fixed, that $300 soon got consumed up in what the variable rate was. So, that's where then they weren't, I guess their loan repayments weren't coming down because they had consumed up to that. So whilst they had the equity back into the house and they had that redraw facility, it was being consumed because of the rates increasing. So it's also, home loans are never, and I always say to people, they're never a set and forget. There are set, you don't want to be going and refinancing every 12 months because it's a nightmare, but you want to be looking at that every 12 months, every 2 years. And if there are rates out there that are better and it is viable to do it, then you'd look at refinancing again. So, there are those things that you can look at to go, is there a need to refinance?
Yeah. And
coming out of marriages, like some people don't have home loans, but some people have credit cards and that. And so, and I do look at that. So I class myself as a finance broker, and part of my goal when I started this business 4 years ago was it was very much about that empathy and that passion to actually help people. I'm not a fan of personal loans, but I am a fan but I'm an advocate of, if it relieves a short-term stress and you actually action that to get you a step forward, I am very happy with giving somebody a personal loan. But if you come back to me in 6 months and that's racked up and you've got another, multiple loan facilities, that tells me you've got an actual problem. But, I love working with people who go, get me out of this so that I can move forward. And how many times do you see where, you've come out of relationships, you go into a new relationship, which you become the Brady Bunch. So there's more kids to look at. There's higher servicing because then you're looking at all the children together. So, your servicing then changes again about how many dependents you have. It's another factor that you got a kid in. So you become that combined family and you go, the classic is, oh, but back, 3 years ago, but when I left, I was able to service them this. Yes, but you only had one child to that relationship. You've now had another child to this. Plus this, your new partner's got 2 children. So, we now got 4 children to actually service into it. So, and yes, you have a new income, but you've got all those things that you look at.
Yeah.
You leave a relationship and you may not have a home, but you might have shared a car, then you need a car. Or it's just those things to, you leave a relationship or you finish a relationship, you sadly, if you have that debt involved, you just feel like you're drowning and you're never getting beyond. And I always say to people, address it, don't live by it. You can save yourself some money because, that's one of the biggest factors is that stress. And by having that conversation, how do you know that you can't be helped rather than sitting there like, with your head in the sand the whole time?
Yeah, wonderful. And if people are looking to perhaps engage finance for renovations, to complete renovations when they're separated and they're wanting to sell and things like that, is that something you could also help with?
Absolutely. So, again, that's the objective that, that would then still be potentially, depending on what your structure is, then you'd be still looking at, but you'd be looking at 2 households to be mindful of that too.
Yeah.
So because you've now separated. So it's the cost of living of 2 households, but you've still got, at least you still have that dual income coming in and things like that.
Yeah.
So there are things like that. Even, and a lot of people don't know out there as well is, the cost of divorce costs you an absolute fortune. And some people get forced into situations that, they're arguing over something and you go, but, you might be arguing over $50,000, but is that $50,000 in comparison to them paying your solicitor or your lawyer, $63,000, is that $50,000 worth it? Or
exactly.
I have to give it all up because I can't afford it. And again, not get it, there are lenders out there that actually, not a lot of them, so don't think but this is where talking to a broker or talking outside of just looking at a normal bank, there are private facilities and lenders that will actually lend based on a divorce settlement as well, so that you can actually, so you aren't forced into a settlement because you can't afford to keep fighting for it. If it's worth, you don't have to. The flip side is you don't necessarily have to bow down. There are lenders that will you can actually borrow, sadly, but you can borrow for a divorce. So
wow.
legal fees. So there are some of those facilities. So sometimes there's answers out there that, and again, yes, it's getting you back into a debt, but it might be that short-term solution until you get to that property settlement. So obviously
litigation funders. Yeah, I'm quite familiar with the litigation funders. And I think particularly people are dealing with children as well, and children are always high stake, and people are prepared to throw more money at disputes around children. But also, like you say, it could be a short-term solution for getting you through property settlement if you need to. I mean, ideally, I'm here to help people not do that, and keep those legal fees in their pockets as much as possible. But yes, you're quite right. Sadly, that's not possible. But all right. Well, thank you so much for everything that you shared with us today. I think it's going to be most helpful for everyone, all of my clients as well as your clients as well, who come in just listen in about some tips around financing and capacity and like. So I'm going to pop your details down in the comments to the YouTube clip that we'll do here, and also on my website. So anyone who wants to give you a call or connect with you, they absolutely can. They can just give you a call anytime and get some basic information around that. You start the process of the ball rolling of the financing capacity, which again, very early days. You've got a house and you need to look at that post-separation. That's probably one of the very early day things you want to be doing.
And you want to be having that conversation. Like, don't listen to, friends and that. Talk to an expert and actually just have that conversation. And literally it is sometimes just picking up that phone. Maybe there isn't a solution, but how do you know that they're, if you don't have a conversation and, I'm quite financial stress is one of the biggest factors that, on people that I go, if you can help somebody get out of that financial stress or just talk it through, make
Absolutely.
sure you can think a bit clearer and get on with your life a bit quicker.
And the last thing that you want to see people doing is arguing over keeping your house, which neither of them can keep, which happens as well. Yep. So getting the information early is just so critical, so you can figure out, well, can either of us keep this one, and if so, who? Yep. Right? And do I want to?
Yeah. And do you want to? And or if let's sell this house. Nobody might want to, but then flip the card and go, okay, I don't want to, because really owning that home is the emotional side of it, correct? So doing the flip, going, but if we split and I end up with X, Y, Z, and we have that conversation. Well, if you end up with X, Y, Z amount of funds and you have a job, maybe you can move into getting your own place, which gives your own independence and a new way. Sometimes, and again, it all comes back to literally picking up a phone and having a conversation and trying to relieve some of that stress that potentially where there are solutions out there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jackie. Really appreciate your time today. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you. And you have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. You too. Bye.